It's cold outside, but how cold-blooded was the company that made your goose down jacket with real fur as decorative trim? The blood on your Canada Goose jacket. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them about how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for the animals. On today's episode, PETA campaigner Ashley Byrne on why there's nothing warm about Canada Goose, not when it comes to that decorative fur trim taken from a trapped coyote.
Cats and dogs have accidentally been caught in traps that were set out to trap coyotes and other animals before. So the coyotes are trapped in these steel traps, and then when the hunters come back for them, if they've survived the elements, if they haven't been killed by a predator while they were, unable to move, they are strangled, shot, stomped to death, beaten, just killed in these horrific ways for this fur that is doing absolutely nothing on this jacket except serving as, just a little bit of decorative trim.
And of course, there's what's done to the ducks and geese. Some of the birds are dead, then plucked, others live-plucked. The difference when we continue on the PETA Podcast. But first, thanks again for joining us here at the PETA Podcast. Please share a link with friends. Let them know the animals have a voice on the PETA Podcast. And keep binging. There's lots to listen to here on the PETA Podcast. While you may be thinking about staying warm these days, listen to episode 30 before thinking about a mohair garment. And in episode 37, hear why wool is a fabric of pain. That's in episode 37. Remember, if you're on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to rate and review the show. It helps the algorithm know that PETA has a podcast on the issues important to you. Now, if you really want to help the animals, you can always just hit the Donate Now button at PETA.org. And if you're high-tech and have Amazon's Alexa, it's as easy as saying, Alexa, donate to PETA. And now to our episode. Ashley Byrne is an Associate Director of Campaigns for PETA, currently focused on Canada Goose. That company says the feathers in the goose down jackets often come from dead birds, which makes the use of the feathers a kind of recycling effort. But as Ashley explained, that doesn't excuse how the birds are cruelly slaughtered for meat. Some suppliers to the company actually live-pluck the birds, but the birds aren't treated much better and often die from the plucking. And then there's the coyotes, who died to provide a coat's decorative trim. A lot of blood was spilled to make a Canada Goose coat. Here's my conversation with PETA campaigner Ashley Byrne on the PETA Podcast. A lot of people know Canada Goose from the James Bond actor Daniel Craig, right? And they took one look at a photo of Daniel Craig in that coat and said, I need one of those. But PETA says this is disastrous for coyotes and geese. So tell me, what is so wrong with Canada Goose, the company, and what they do?
Well, Canada Goose's coats are terrible for animals. Whether you are talking about the coyote fur on the hood or the down feathers, that are used as filling inside, there is cruelty in every stitch of these jackets. They use trapped coyote fur. And these are from coyotes who are caught in steel traps, and then after they wait, sometimes for days, for the hunters to come back and find them, they are strangled, shot, bludgeoned, stomped, just killed in the most horrific ways. And that's if they don't chew their own limbs off trying to escape. And then, the filling is from ducks and geese who are violently killed And they're killed for their meat and their feathers. Some of them even have their throats slit while they're still totally conscious and able to feel pain. So these coats are just a nightmare for animals.
Describe that again. The birds are out in the wild. Do they get the birds and they bring them in somewhere and they do this? Or how is this process done?
The coyotes are trapped in the wild, but the birds come from farms where they are raised for their meat and their feathers. These ducks and geese are raised on farms, and then when it's time for them to be slaughtered, they are very often hung up by their feet. They have their throats slashed with no painkillers in front of other terrified birds who are next, and then they just are left to bleed out in that manner. So, and on top of that, PETA has investigated suppliers that Canada Goose uses, and that's already cruel. We found cruelty on top of that. We found the birds being handled violently by workers, being tossed around and being handled in a manner where sometimes their bones were broken by the time they even made it onto this, assembly line to have their throats cut. Again, there is just cruelty in every stitch of these coats.
When you talk about Canada Goose, the company, and you talk about suppliers, so Canada Goose gets these ducks from the suppliers, and does Canada Goose object to anything? Do they say, hey, let's do this a little nicer? Do they say anything like that? Or do they say, let's get it from a different farm that's nicer to these animals? Do they raise any objection at all? Canada Goose, the company?
Well, Canada Goose has thrown around words like, humane. And they like to sort of put things out on social media saying that they are using products that are from animals who have not been treated cruelly. However, just nothing could be further from the truth. There is no humane way to, get the feathers from ducks and geese to be used for down. Whether you're talking about, geese who are live plucked on a farm, just having their feathers ripped out by the handful, or whether you're talking while they're still alive, or whether you're talking about ducks and geese who are slaughtered and then have their feathers taken. These farms treat the birds like they are just products on an assembly line. And anytime you have a setup like that, profits are always going to be the first priority, and the animals will suffer. So aside from, sort of trying to publicly smooth things over, Canada Goose has not done a thing to try and make things better for animals.
Are there suppliers that they could go to that could make the process a little kinder to the animals, or is it all just bad?
It's all bad, but what they could do is what so many other companies have done. They could switch to high tech, materials that don't use any animals in the first place. So many companies right now, especially this season, are using materials like Primaloft and Thermoball and Plum Tech. They're not only better for the animals, they're actually better at keeping out, the different weather extremes. They keep you warmer. They're better for the environment. So really, Canada Goose has other options. They're just choosing to kind of keep with their bad old ways and not progress.
Now, one thing I noticed, and you might be a fashion maven as well, that when you talk about those alternatives, you're talking about maybe layering up and making things look bulkier, and instead of because I know a lot of people they stayed away from down because they thought, oh, down makes me look all puffy, but the alternatives don't make you look better. Is that a consideration? Have the people who use down, have they made down better?
The thing about down and other animal products is that, there's really only one place you can go with them. These, when you're just ripping a product off the back of an animal, you're kind of stuck with what you've got. Whereas these high tech materials that so many companies are choosing to use now they just keep getting better. You can keep improving on them. You can keep making them more streamlined. You can keep making them, warmer. So yeah, there really haven't been, any advancements in down coats because there really isn't anything else you can do. Whereas these newer alternatives, I mean, sure, it's always going to be kind of a sporty look, but, if you look at the companies that are using the alternatives right now, I know some of my favorite fashion companies this season have been very proud in their ads. They've been boasting about the fact that they're using vegan down alternatives made from things like plastic bottles. And again, they do just keep getting better. There is no reason across the board, whether you're talking about fashion, function, cruelty, the environment, to be using a product like down.
So we get down and you've done the investigations, and I'm sure there's video of some of the investigations.
We have quite a bit of video on PETA.org.
And tell me about what people, if they go to PETA.org, what will they see? What are the kinds of things that they'll see that might make them stop and think before they get anything with down?
People tend to incorrectly assume that down is a benign product because they think, to get feathers, you don't have to kill these birds. The fact is that the birds are being killed. I think if people see how these birds are killed, they would want nothing to do with this product. If you see these birds who are sensitive, intelligent animals, just like our dogs and cats at home, you see them living in cramped, filthy conditions on farms and then, being violently grabbed and, shoved into shackles and having their throats cut. I think most people would never dream of doing something like that themselves. When you really think about it, most people don't want to pay for that either. Once they actually see the cruelty with their own eyes, I think that very few people want to support that.
The geese, the birds, they come to the worker. Do they actually rip the feathers off the bird's back?
That is what some down suppliers do. My understanding is that Canada Goose is using suppliers where the birds are being killed for their meat and their feathers. So the feathers are being taken from dead birds. But again, you're talking about birds raised in cramped, filthy, deprived conditions. So they're leading miserable lives and then dying violent, terrifying deaths.
And then one of the things about the birds, when you rip the feathers off of them, what do they do? I mean, do they seek some kind of mouse down or something to cover up, or they're given blankets to make themselves feel warm? Or what happens once the feathers get ripped off? I mean, are they so debilitated that they die anyway, or can they regenerate the feathers?
Many birds do die of shock or exposure after they are live plucked by down suppliers. The ones who survive are forced to go through, this terrifying, painful experience of having their feathers ripped out by the fistful on multiple occasions before they are eventually slaughtered. And it's hard to say who has it worse because, whether these birds are just dying from the, the violence and the exposure, or whether they're just going through this again and again and then being slaughtered, they just have miserable lives, and nothing is done to keep them comfortable once they are missing these feathers. In fact, very often they suffer from wounds after, not surprisingly, after going through this live plucking process. The most that's ever done for them is that these wounds will be stitched up by hand with no painkillers, by workers who are hurrying. I would also mention that the workers are paid by the pound. And so their priority is to just pluck these birds as fast as they can. So these ducks and geese are treated very roughly.
Where the suppliers generally in the United States or in Canada?
On down farms that use this live plucking process, I know that we've seen, some of them overseas, some in Europe. I believe we have found this to be something that happens in the United States as well. With the Canada Goose suppliers specifically, I believe they use suppliers located in Canada. And again, I know that when we investigated, the supplier that we investigated was not one that used live plucking, but what we found was just as terrible. I mean, we found the birds being rounded up very roughly, sometimes, to the point where some of them were crushed or suffocated, grabbed by their necks and crammed into crates. And, again, these processes so violent and, that many of them don't even survive, to get to slaughter. They were confined in in these little cramped cages for up to 24 hours, while they were waiting to be slaughtered. And then they're killed right in front of each other. I mean, these are intelligent animals. These are sensitive animals. And to put them through that kind of pain and terror is just hideous.
And so you would never see a company like Canada Goose tell the truth, or it's any company that uses down tell the truth in their marketing materials about down. Like, you wouldn't see a label on a jacket saying live pluck, from live pluck. You would never see them admit to that.
Absolutely not. No, their marketing is very deceptive.
I mean, I've gone through the catalogs, and they kind of, there's the Primaloft, and there's the Thinsulate and all the other materials that are out there. I always see the catalogs also that have the down, and they just kind of downplay it, like this is down, and they try to make it more form-fitting and slimming, so it doesn't look like the puffy jackets of old, so you look like the Michelin tire man or something like that. It's a little more fashionable. But all right, so tell me about that, about the coyote fur, because the down has a function in terms of being warmth, providing warmth, but the coyote fur is purely decorative. And what happens? How did they get that fur again?
The fur trim on Canada Goose coats comes from coyotes who are trapped in the wild. And, of course, these traps, they have no discretion about who they're catching. So they can catch a nursing mother whose pups will then die because, she won't be coming back to them. They can catch an animal who wasn't even the target in the first place. People's cats and dogs have accidentally been caught in traps that were set out to trap coyotes and other animals before. So the coyotes are trapped in these steel traps. And then when the hunters come back for them, if they've survived the elements, if they haven't been killed by a predator while they were, unable to move, they are strangled, shot, stomped to death, beaten, just killed in these horrific ways for this fur that is doing absolutely nothing on this jacket except serving as, just a little bit of decorative trim. And, when PETA first put out a shocking video that showed how coyotes are trapped for the lining on Canada Goose coats, it got more than 16 million views on Facebook in only 3 days. People went crazy, and Canada Goose was so flooded with comments from people who were just devastated when they saw, just this horrific process and people just demanding that they stop using fur. They couldn't keep up with it. I mean, they were deleting them as fast as they could, and they just kept coming. This coyote fur trim, it is totally unnecessary, incredibly cruel and wasteful. And so many companies have just been dropping fur right and left. There are fantastic options out there, for any company that does want the look of fur. The faux fur that is available right now is it's better for the environment. It's, it looks very realistic. There's just no excuse to be using coyote fur.
If people go to PETA.org, what will they see on the videos?
They will see terrified, suffering coyotes with their legs caught in traps, struggling to get away, frightened. It's very hard to watch. It's not that different. It's like watching a dog caught in a trap. I mean, they're struggling, they're terrified, they're in pain, and there is nothing they can do. some of these animals are so desperate to get away, especially a mother, who knows that she has pups waiting for her, that they will try to chew off their own limbs sometimes to escape. Yeah, it is just hard to watch. And there is, when you kind of try to contrast that with the language that Canada Goose uses on their website, trying to say that they abide by humane trapping standards, it's absurd. There is no humane way to catch an animal in a steel-jawed trap, make them wait for up to 72 hours in fear and pain, and then kill them. There is no way in the world for that to be humane.
So is there any way that Canada Goose can justify what they do and how they use coyotes in their garments?
None whatsoever, especially since so many brands are making competing products that have the same look, that have a fur trim that just happens to be faux fur, that have, just incredibly warm, eco-friendly, fillings that keep out the environment, that are not made from animals. If other brands can do it, Canada Goose could be doing it.
Now, you'd think that most people, once they see these videos, would realize that wearing a coat like that isn't worth it. And Canada Goose, they want you to think that wearing a coat like that's going to turn you into James Bond. And we know that doesn't happen. But the company has capitalized on this. Are they giving coats to celebrities to promote these coats?
Canada Goose, they send coats to celebrities. They sponsor any film festival, that will accept their sponsorship, like Sundance and the Toronto Film Festival. And I think a lot of celebrities wear these coats without really thinking about it. I think they get one for free and they put it on and they end up photographed in it, and people copy them. I can tell you that many celebrities, after, receiving a letter and information about, the cruelty that is built into these coats, we see that they do stop wearing them. And I can tell you, just being here in New York City and going to many demonstrations outside the Canada Goose store here, I think a lot of people will buy a jacket with fur trim, assuming that it's fake. And when people see these videos, when they see, the images on leaflets and posters, a lot of people will take off the fur trim on the spot, throw it away, or, just hand it over to activists and ask them to do something with it, on their behalf. I mean, a lot of people buy these coats without really thinking about what has gone into it.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense that they would that a company would actually kill an animal for trim. So if you find out the truth and you're wearing these coats, it can be that moment for people to say, "I'm not wearing this." Oh, tell me what has PETA been doing about this kind of marketing process that the Canada Goose has, to give away these free coats?
Well, we've launched a high-profile campaign exposing the truth about, the fur trim on Canada Goose jackets, the down filling in Canada Goose jackets. That involves everything from organizing, protests on the street outside their stores to posting videos on social media of how coyotes and ducks and geese are suffering for these coats, writing to celebrities who are photographed in these coats and letting them know what they're wearing. We've even purchased stock in Canada Goose when the company went public. We became shareholders so that we could, have a voice that way, so that we could attend their meetings and eventually, submit shareholder resolutions. And this is something that we've done with many other companies. So we are, just taking every opportunity that we can get to expose the truth about what this company is doing.
I guess now is their prime time. It's getting colder and people are saying, I need something warm. Let me grab that coat. Do you have a sense of whether or not you're reaching the public and the consumer and that they're changing their ways? Or where do you assess where you are now in the struggle against Canada Goose?
Well, I think since most people aren't in favor of real fur and don't want to support cruelty to animals, I think we're at a point where it's all about educating the public about what these, what is, contained in these coats. I think we're at a point where we are just trying to reach their potential customers and let them know, what they're buying. I can tell you, even just this past weekend, I was part of a big Fur Free Friday protest outside the Canada Goose store, and people were waiting in line to get in. But then, when they saw posters, when they saw video, you did see people reacting. I even saw people who had been standing in line waiting to get into the store. I even saw a couple of them crying when they saw this footage of coyotes being trapped and killed. So I think where we are now is really just at a point where, we just need to keep putting the truth about these coats in front of people, in front of consumers. Education is Canada Goose's worst nightmare. I think that they know that the more the truth gets out, they're going to see their business taking a hit.
I'm in a place where it's not that cold, but I always feel cold, and I'm just layering up, and I don't have a stitch of animal product on me, and I feel pretty warm. A lot of people, though, when you say, hey, look, there are alternatives, they go back to their old standby, which is sometimes down, sometimes fur, sometimes those traditional things. Do you notice that it's a generation gap sometimes? Or is it the older folks who tend to sort of hang on to their old down coats?
I do think that very often buying something like a down coat is something that people just do out of habit. They just associate the idea of down with winter coats. However, I do think that younger consumers are more savvy. I think that they are, they've grown up taking more time to do things like read labels and research the things they're buying because they want their products to be ethical. They care about the environment, they care about animals, they care about, they care about how their products are made. I think that younger consumers are just excited about things that are high tech. And again, with these, whether you're talking about fur or down or wool, these animal materials are just kind of the old way of doing things. And there's really nothing exciting or innovative about them. Whereas if you look at the options coming out for cruelty-free clothing, I mean, it's incredible. Everything from these, high-tech materials that we've been talking about to, spider silk and leather that is produced in a lab without any animals in the process. I mean, there are just so many exciting things, actually on the market and on the horizon when it comes to animal-free fashion. Most consumers are interested in that sort of thing. I think that younger consumers are the ones who are making more demands. I think they're label readers. I think they pay attention. And I think we're seeing a lot of companies responding to that.
And I suppose with a younger person, once you let them know the truth about Canada Goose, they're quick to respond. They're quick to act. They stop using it, right?
Absolutely. And, in a lot of ways, I think that goes for most consumers. I mean, again, I think that so many people buy Canada Goose, who are buying Canada Goose coats, are doing so because of the label, because of the logo, and they're not really doing any research. They're not, they're not putting much thought into what they're buying. They're buying the coats because they've seen the logo, as you mentioned, on a celebrity, or, it's just kind of familiar. I absolutely think that when those people see the facts, their feelings towards that brand just change drastically.
Okay, so I'm on the street with your dog. Maybe not with your dog. That's a dog, right?
Yeah.
Or is that you shaking your head with bangles on your head?
My dog crawled into my lap in the middle of our discussion.
That's all right. That's okay. That's good. You're a PETA person. You're allowed
Exactly.
to have that happen. All right. So I'm walking down the street. I'm wearing proudly my Canada Goose coat because I just saw Skyfall, and I just saw Daniel Craig, who probably is being replaced because he wore that Canada Goose coat. No, probably not. But I saw him, and I'm wearing the coat. I'm walking proudly down Fifth Avenue or wherever, down, in Brooklyn or someplace, which wouldn't be cool. So I probably would not be walking down Brooklyn. I'd be walking in somewhere in Manhattan thinking I'm so cool wearing my Canada Goose down jacket. And you see me, and what do you tell me?
I find that just nicely telling people, just nicely asking people if they've seen, if they know that they're wearing real fur, and if they've seen the videos of how animals are trapped and killed for that fur, a nice, polite, just informative way can be very effective. I'll show someone on my phone. I'll just pull up the video on my phone and say, would you like to see this? Especially if the other person is with a dog. Coyotes are just really not that different from the dogs who we live with at home. And when you see that coyote in the trap, I think that if you're a dog lover, it's especially hard. So, I find that just nicely asking people if they're aware of how that fur was obtained and showing them if they're not goes a long way.
Have you ever changed anyone's mind right there on the spot, showing a video on your iPhone or just talking to that person?
Even at the demonstration that I mentioned this weekend that I was part of, I was not the one who spoke directly to these people, but there were at least 2 different people who removed their fur trims on the spot and got rid of them, and said that they would never have bought their coats if they knew what they were supporting. So, I think most people are kind and compassionate and don't want to cause animals to suffer, especially for something as frivolous as a little bit of trim on a coat.
Ashley, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us here on the PETA Podcast. And before I let you go, I just want to ask you this question that I ask usually of all our guests. Why do you keep doing this? Why are you so motivated to do what you do?
I think for me, it's 2-pronged. First of all, I grew up like I think so many of us do with cats and dogs who I loved. And when I got to the point where I made the connection between those cats and dogs who were part of my family and the animals who were ending up on my plate and in my closet and, who were being used in the circus and, just all the animals who were not living happy lives like my animals at home, it was like knowing that my own family members were out there being tormented and killed for all these things that were totally unnecessary. And I still feel that way. And so that's what made this cause so important to me. But the other thing I would say is that having been a vegan for over 20 years now, I have seen such incredible changes that have come because people refused to just sit back and, and look the other way and say, okay, well, we've always eaten meat, so we'll keep eating meat. Or, well, we've always worn leather, we've always gone to the circus, so we'll keep doing these things. The way things have changed so quickly, and so drastically, whether you're talking about being able to walk into, any Starbucks and get a soy latte or go to half the big chain restaurants out there and get a veggie burger, or the fact that we're actually growing things like leather and wool in laboratories now. It's just, it's made me absolutely certain that not only can we move in a better direction, most people want to. So that's a great reason to get up every day and just, be committed to, to creating a cruelty-free society. Yeah. And so, I'm so encouraged by all the progress that we have made and that we are making. There's never been a better time because people, I think that most people really don't want to be part of causing animals or anyone else to suffer. And the good news is that they don't need to.
Ashley Byrne, Associate Director of Campaigns for PETA on Canada Goose's Cold-Blooded Jackets. Check out the videos on PETA.org or take action and go to the show notes for links. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on AMOK.com. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. And don't forget, you can help the animals and PETA, especially if you have Amazon's Alexa. Just say, Alexa, donate to PETA. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Emil Guillermo.